wonderful to have Eleanor with us this evening. Eleanor Nesbitt, whose title is Introducing Sikhs and Sikhism, Continuities and Changes. And before we start, I must say that there is no time when we needed to do this more than we do now. We live in very troubled times, and the news from Southampton over the last few days, which is going on and on, reminds us how important it is that we meet each other across the cultures and the faiths. So we listen and we learn, and we work together for a peaceful, harmonious community. So I'm really, really pleased that we are listening to Eleanor tonight. I've known about Eleanor's work for a long time, though I only recently met you. Our office, of course, is in Leicester, and there we have a very strong Sikh community, and I often have, and very often Eleanor's name has come up. She's given a talk, or she's coming to give a talk, or she's written another book. And that has been very exciting. So it's lovely that you're here now. Eleanor is a Quaker, and she's worked with the Sikh community for over 40 years. A long, long time. True friendship, true understanding, and I would say loving kindness. She also has a new book of poetry out very recently. It's called Towards Hope, and it's an inspiring collection, including her responses to many of the issues we all face in our lives now. Some of us met you, Eleanor, at our conference in January. It's a real pleasure to have you with us now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for giving up your evening. Am I audible? Can everybody hear me? Yes? Let me know in some way if you can't, if my voice drops. What I've done is I've prepared a PowerPoint, which is really a sequence of slides that will prompt me to say things about the way in which the Sikh community and Sikh tradition has developed during those 40 years that I've been privileged to have contact with Sikhs. Most of them nowadays in Coventry, but in fact much more widespread than that. And what I'm going to try to do is to introduce some of the basics, if you like, although I know that probably everybody is familiar. And you'll have to excuse me if I either go over your head a bit or talk down to you because I'm saying something that's so obviously part of your general knowledge already. As you've heard, there'll be time for questions and answers at the end, and I look forward to that. I haven't adapted what I'm saying in the light of the troubling events that have just been mentioned, but I may draw attention to slides in a different way because of their relevance. I hope that there are some Sikhs with us. I think there may be, but I can't see any on my screen at the moment. We all have a different position in relation to the Sikh tradition, whether it's because we have neighbours or we've travelled to India, particularly Punjab, or we've read something in a book, or we've seen the...
I'm interrupting you. So somebody tried to get in Surinder Kaur, but she can't. She texts me, she can't get in. She trying again. Sorry to bother you. Somebody tried to get in, but she texts me, she can't.
Not in the waiting room.
That will be good if Surinder joins us.
Yeah, she tried last 15 minutes, but she can't. I asked her, where are you? And she said, I'm trying, she can't get in. Do so with her, I don't know.
Shall I pause or shall I carry on?
Keep going, there's nothing I can do.
Okay, So I'm going to start to share my screen, I hope. Is that how it's supposed to look, Matt?
And if you do that one on the bottom right, it makes it
Again,
yeah,
that's better. Yes. So continuities and changes, or continuity and change. Anyway, like any faith tradition, like any human activity or community, all of the time, there are threads of the past that continue, and there are disruptions, and there are gradual changes and more striking ones. And I'm going to start with this picture, which introduces a few major Sikh contributors in different ways to our lives in those 40 years that I've mentioned. And you'll see how there's a spread of those involved in finance, politics, the arts. And that's very true to the thrust of the Sikh tradition, which is very much a world-affirming one, with encouragement to people to live to the full, engaged in contemplation on the divine, but fully involved in family and community, national and nowadays international life. On the left-hand side, you have Manmohan Singh, who was at one time Indian Prime Minister. Before that, he'd been Finance Minister. I feel that he probably made the biggest difference to India of anybody I can think of during this period of time, because he actually opened India up economically, opened it up to importing from outside, to just a very different relationship with the other countries in the world from what preceded it. A modest man, a man who was steeped in his Sikh faith, brought up in a Punjab village, always humble, always courteous, amidst the the very, very challenging circumstances in which he headed the biggest democracy on earth. And also, I mean, Manmohan Singh clearly was an economist by trade, having studied in Punjab and then in Cambridge and then in Oxford, where he evolved the ideas that he then applied. And you can also see Ajay Pal Singh Banga, who used to be the director of MasterCard and now heads the World Bank. Again, somebody who is unswerving in his Sikh identity and allegiance, and who brings insights that are consistent with that in his financial vision, a concern for climate change and that sort of thing. And then you can see above Ajay Singh, you can see the Singh twins, Amrit and Rabindra, whose contribution has been massive, a contribution to the arts. They are exquisite artists who work together on most of their pieces, and they celebrate their twinness and describe themselves as past modern rather than postmodern. They had a wonderful exhibition in Kew Gardens in the gallery there, which, like so much of their work, is highly political, and in this case, looking at the interaction between empire and economics and greed and botany and the production of crops. And another woman in the right-hand corner is Shauna Singh Baldwin, who is a brilliant novelist. And I do commend, for example, The Selector of Souls, or What the Body Remembers, or any of her publications. I often feel that one can understand communities best through reading fiction. And then above Shauna, you can see Narinder Singh Kapani, who is generally described as the pioneer of fibre optics. When he was at school in Punjab, he was told by his teacher that light never bends, or it can't be bent. And he decided that he would show that his teacher was not quite correct. And so the fiber optics that are used in our communications in medical advance and so on originate largely with the pioneering research of Narinder Singh Kapani. But on top of that, he's been a benefactor. He's set up a chair in Sikh studies in the University of California. He's shared his art collection and so on. So this is just an example of the ways in which, during the last 40 years, Sikhs have been influential in the world around them, and I would say a force for good. And in our own country, here are 10 of the, I think there are now 11 Sikh MPs in the UK Parliament. And involvement in politics is just so true to the Sikh vision of a balance in one's life and a balance between Piri, the spiritual, and Miri, what is more earthly and temporal. And so in this country, as I say, I think we've got 11 Sikh MPs at the moment and a number of Sikhs in the House of Lords. And we all know probably of Lord Inderjeet Singh. And this compares with 19 Sikh MPs in Canada and 12 in India. You may recognise some of these faces. I think, as far as I can tell, that Satvir Kaur, who we've heard on the news recently because she's MP for Southampton, is in the middle of the second row down. That looks like her to me, but I'm not 100% sure. And yes, this balance between Miri and Piri, between the earthly and the spiritual. You see the two pennants, the two Nishan Sahibs, they represent those twin principles. And this photograph of the Golden Temple, Darbar Sahib, Harmandir Sahib, whatever you wish to call it, you can see how closely connected by that causeway it is to the Akal Takht, the seat of temporal authority, from which edicts have been issued over the ages that concern the governance and the practice of the Sikh community. And like any world religion, and I'm going to say a bit more, I expect, about talking about Sikhi or Sikhism as a world religion, there is a tremendous diversity of ways in which people interact with their heritage, practice their faith, sidestep it or whatever. But one thing which does seem to be very much a unifying factor is a high regard for the Golden Temple in Amritsar, a respect for it. And in home after home, Gurdwara after Gurdwara, you see a picture of this very, very special place. Just to remind you, or to fill in the sort of basics of Sikh tradition, we have Guru Nanak in the centre, born in 1469, roughly a contemporary of Martin Luther and of Richard III. And then below him, Guru Gobind Singh, who passes away in 1708. So that's the span of time covered by the 10 human gurus. How many gurus do Sikhs have? You can say 10, you can say 11, and include the Guru Granth Sahib, the scripture, which you can see on its particular dais between Guru Nanak and the four gurus in roundels on the left-hand side. Or you could say 12 gurus if you're going to include Wahiguru, Satguru, the divine teaching principle, which in our rather limited English language we tend to translate as God. And you can see the Golden Temple, Harmandir Sahib, Darbar Sahib to the right, and then the four other gurus. I won't go through identifying them, but each has iconographically, it's his very clear features that make it possible to work out who is who. You can see the Ik Omkar, the logo of the Sikhs, the summary of essential Sikh teaching. It looks like a a 9 with a twirly tail and a sort of figure 3 beside it, the ik onkar, so often translated under the influence of basically of the British, as there is one God, but increasingly rendered in different ways in the English language, as one being is, or just as oneness with a capital O. When Annie Besant wrote about Sikhs in 1901, she simply said there is one Onkar, as a way of sort of acknowledging that there isn't a translation for this foundational principle of a belief in oneness. And the other emblem, if you like, of the Sikh tradition is the khanda, which you can see in each of the 4 corners, a more martial-looking symbol created from 3 swords and a quoit, often to be found, like the Ikomkar, in Sikh houses, on Gurdwara, a giveaway that somewhere or someone is Sikh. And it's the 10th Guru, who is there in the centre below Guru Nanak, who, of course, is identified with the development of Sikhs into a Khalsa, into a community of people with a single commitment to the Gurus and to the divine principle. And as anybody who studies Aura at school knows, the 5 Ks, the 5 outward signs of being an initiated Sikh, which all begin with the equivalent of the letter K in the Gurumukhi alphabet. And of course, I'll be happy to explain what they all are, but I think a lot of people will already know. And what I want to do is actually now move on to the map of Punjab, because for many people who are Sikh, there's actually being Sikh and being Punjabi are one and the same thing. But it's a bit more complicated than that. So this map shows the greater Punjab, if you like, Punjab before 1947, when India had a bit carved off, which became Pakistan. And you can see it's roughly the shape of a tooth, of a molar, a tooth with 2 roots. And the left-hand part is now all in Pakistan. And it's the bigger part. And the 5 rivers of Punjab are tributaries of the Indus. And they are mostly in Pakistan's share of Punjab. The Indian share of Punjab is now the tinier part, which is called East Punjab, because 2 big chunks, Himachal Pradesh and Haryana, have been carved out of it. And so the Indian state of Punjab is very, very much smaller than what Punjab was in the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh in the 19th century, or in the time of the Gurus. But it's Punjabi-ness, which is just such a key feature of Sikhs' culture and outlook and historical experience. In fact, if I was talking sort of analytically about developments in the Sikh community in the last 40 years, I would say that all of the time in individuals' lives, there is an interplay between their relationship with being a Sikh, with the Guru's teaching, with the code of discipline, the Rahat, and so on, with the religious aspect of being a Sikh. There's this interplay between that and Punjabiness, the qualities that just run through Punjab, hospitality and humour, particular famous epic poems, music, dance, food, just all these aspects of being Punjabi. And sometimes the pressures of being Punjabi are a little bit different from the imperatives of being devoutly religious. I mean, family honour, an emphasis on that, is very much part of being Punjabi rather than part of Sikh teaching. And I could go on about that. But in some ways, being Punjabi and being Sikh reinforce each other. So, for instance, being generous, being a philanthropist, giving to others, that's part of Punjabi culture and it's part of the religious teaching of Sikhs. But then there's a third factor, which is interacting all the time in people's lives. And that's what tends to get called Westernization or modernity or the 21st century. It's the big tug of contemporary trends, whether it's fashions in clothes or ideas, whether it's principles, for example, like I don't know, some of the values which we may hold highly, like individual freedom. And sometimes there is a conflict in people's lives, and I would say particularly in the lives of young people, and probably most of all in the lives of young women, when it comes to deciding about marriage or about all sorts of issues, dress, how one's going to lead one's life. There is this interplay. Now, people's first encounter with the Sikh community may well be visiting a Gurdwara and being part of a langar. And people are impressed by the wonderful organised hospitality involved in providing meals 24/7. And if it happens to be the Golden Temple, well, it might be 80,000 meals a day. In Gurdwaras in Britain, it will be fewer, but it's still overwhelmingly impressive. And the langar is historically part of the experience of being in the Gurdwara, sitting in the langar, regardless of one's rank and all the rest of it, as equals. That is as much a part of visiting the Gurdwara as being in the presence of the scriptural guru or being in the congregation. And particularly this century, langar and this principle of serving humanity has spilled out onto the streets and across the world. So, for instance, Khalsa Aid, which you can see is on the back of that volunteer's top, basically started with somebody called Ravi Singh and a feeling that there needed to be help given to people in desperate need in Kosovo. And since then, Khalsa Aid and other Sikh organisations have been involved wherever there have been crises internationally, aiding persecuted groups like the Yazidi, for example, and distributing food in places like Coventry. So we have Langar Aid, which is related to the umbrella organisation Khalsa Aid. And interestingly, I don't know how many people read the Church Times in this group, but on the 22nd of May, there was an article by Sandeep Bridge, and she says in it, on New Year's Day, Coventry Cathedral hosted Langar Aid, a feeding humanity project by Khalsa Aid, the Sikh and Punjabi tradition of communal eating brought into a Christian space, built on the hope of resurrection from the ruins and reconciliation after conflict. So you can see ways in which Sikh principles and Sikh practice, in this case, have become much higher profile and internationally recognised. Another way in which people often encounter Sikh tradition for the first time is being invited to a wedding. And here you can see two stages of the religious ceremony. You can see the bride and groom sitting facing the Holy Book, the Guru Granth Sahib. And you can also see them as they are linked together, walking around, circumambulating around the scriptures as part of the Anand Karaj, the Sikh religious rite. Now, it was in 1909 the Anand Marriage Act recognised this way of being married in Indian law in British India. Of recent years, there have been a number of ways in which marriage and the marriage ceremony have been impacted. So, for instance, in Coventry, I don't know if any Sikh would now dare to have to marry somebody from another community, whether Hindu, Christian, or whatever, in a Gurdwara, because there have been so many incidences of marriages being disrupted, which is something I've not heard of happening in India, but it certainly in Britain, it has become a very, very delicate subject, and particularly since 2007, when there was what's called a Sandesh, a ruling from the Akal Takht in Amritsar, which was forbidding marriage in the presence of the Sikh scriptures, unless both the couple had a Sikh second name, Singh for the man and Kaur for the woman, and were solely practitioners of the Sikh faith. And there were a number of other constraints on who could acceptably be married in the Gurdwara. There was not a ban on intermarriage or marrying out, but people were welcome to come after a civil marriage to have a blessing or some sort of Sikh ceremony, but not the Anand Karaj, the central Sikh marriage rite. And this has been something pretty major, I think, in this country. And Sikhs themselves, who I've talked to, have taken somewhat different positions on the real difficulty that arises for the increasing number of families where marriage is across traditional borders, whether of caste or of religious faith and ethnicity. Because there are those, and many, many Sikhs, who are so glad that the Sikh tradition is inclusive, that the Sikh scriptures include verses by not only gurus, but also by Hindu and Sikh poets. And they see that, the Gurdwara as a place of welcome and so on. But on the other hand, there are those who would say, yes, that's fine, but this is actually a rite which should only be conducted for two Sikhs, and preferably for two initiated, two Amritdhari Sikhs. So there is a difference in response to the rather tense situation that there is around mixed marriages at the moment. Another change that has happened during these years where I've been in contact with Sikhs is in relation to kirtan, to Sikh sacred music. So on the right, you can see what you would normally see, and this is still the case if you go to a Gurdwara, musicians playing tabla, the twin drums, baja, the harmonium, and there might be another instrument, and they will be singing. The harmonium is almost ubiquitous. Now, increasingly, Sikhs are aware of the fact that actually the harmonium came to India with the missionaries, and it was not part of the Sikh musical tradition. And remember that music is absolutely central to Sikh worship, because unlike other holy books, the verses of the Guru Granth Sahib are all arranged according to rag, according to the musical mode that they are to be sung to. And worship largely consists of the singing of the sacred hymns. But people like Harjinder Singh Lally, who's one of my colleagues at the University of Warwick, actually working in cyber forensics, he has championed the traditional instruments. He himself is seen there, the top, playing the sarangi. And I think you may have heard on the news last year, through his efforts largely, training in Sikh sacred music became recognised with examinations and so on, equivalent to the examinations of piano playing or Western instruments, so that, for example, youngsters could get UCAS points that would add up and be valid when trying to get university places. And Harjinder has worked tirelessly for this. Just this weekend, I was at a festival in London, and and I met somebody who had come down from Leeds to give a performance on the santoor, which is another of the traditional instruments. In this case, little hammers are used on the strings rather than the strings being bowed. And you can see the gentleman at the bottom is playing that traditional instrument. There is tremendous a change afoot in relation to Sikh music, both seeking out the pre-colonial tradition and recovering it, and no doubt allowing it to change in all sorts of ways, and also finding other more experimental ways of musical expression. Now, another change that has been happening during the 40 years I'm talking about, I haven't got a picture for, but it's what I call the calendar controversy. For a time, I was asked by, I think it was Let's, by one of the diary companies, to provide the dates for Sikh religious festivals. Now, that is very complicated because most of the time, or much of the time still, some, at least, of the Sikh calendar dates are fixed according to the calendar that is shared with Hindus, the Bikrami calendar. So, for example, by and large, Sikhs will be celebrating Diwali at the same time as Hindus, and it will change according to the lunar calendar, although it will be roughly at the same time of the year in November. But what somebody called Pal Singh Purewal, a Canadian Sikh, tried to do was to provide a calendar in which the dates would be constant by the Gregorian secular calendar. So, for example, Guru Gobind Singh's birthday couldn't both be in December and in January. It would be fixed in the same way that Christmas is fixed, on a particular date by the secular calendar. And so, anyway, Pal Singh's efforts were authorized in Amritsar, and he's regarded as the founder of the Mool Nanak Shahi calendar. But it has been tweaked and changed in various ways. So, for example, the Sikh Hola Mohalla will still be fixed in relation to Hindu Holi. So this is an ongoing sort of development. And you can see how having a calendar which is separate, completely separate from the Hindu calendar, is part and parcel of the Sikh tradition feeling a fully independent faith tradition. But it's not straightforward. And I think for most people, it's not even an issue that they're aware of. But as soon as you start looking into the Sikh calendar and trying to predict dates for future years, you become aware of the ongoing discussion about the calendar. Now, one of the things which I certainly have noticed over the years that I've been around Sikhs in Britain has been an increasing interest in Nihang tradition, the warrior tradition among Sikhs. And it means that in Gurdwara premises, there are practices in the martial art that's associated with weaponry. And a lot of this is down to somebody called Nidhar Singh Nihang, who is shown here, he's from Wolverhampton. He spent years and years in India learning from masters of the Sikh martial art. And you can see the great array of weapons that he has there. And you can imagine just the tremendous skill and precision that goes into what could be a very dangerous art. And I have to say that over all these years of increasing interest in this tradition, there hasn't been any sort of corresponding irresponsible use of weapons, any more than somebody involved in any other martial art then goes out into the street and inflicts damage on people. But looking at this picture in the light of what happened with Vikram Digwa and Henry Novak, it does raise all sorts of questions. so we may want to discuss them later. In this picture, you can see on the left-hand side the work of Emily Eden, who was a sister of the she was a sister of Lord Auckland, who was the representative of the British government who negotiated with Maharaja Ranjit Singh of Punjab. And she was a very skilled artist. And she, like most Europeans in India, was fascinated by the Nihangs, or the Akali Nihangs. She referred to them as the Akalis. And here you can see from 1838, Akali Nihangs with they've got their quoits and no doubt a whole lot of other weapons. And she has been painting them. But actually, I've headed this Sikh turbans because one of the things which has been very evident during these last few decades has been the fact that more and more Sikh women are wearing the turban. And I used to think, like others who were involved in the study of Sikh history, that actually women began wearing the turban in the 19th, or no, rather in the 20th century even, in groups like the Akhand Kirtani Jatha. So not in the Sikh mainstream. But then, if you look at Emily's painting, the second one, of the woman on horseback from 1838, you can see this is an Akali Nihang family, and she has very definitely got the equivalent of a turban on her head. So there has been a tradition, but certainly by no means the majority of Sikh women wearing the turban. The top, you can see a sort of 6 pictures of the stages of a man tying a fairly normal mainstream sort of a turban. Turban tying and Sikh hair and so on have just fascinated outsiders over the centuries. And it's not surprising that a generation or two of women in this country, recognizing the Sikh principle of equality, not least between men and women, have taken on wearing the turban as part of their identity. But also involved in this is the internet. And the internet is perhaps the biggest factor in change that I have noticed over the years. And when I say the internet connects with this, not only has the internet provided contact between Sikhs in different countries, not only has it provided access to the Sikh scriptures in a way that people never had before, because they, unless they had a room in their house that they could devote to honouring the scriptures as was expected, they couldn't have the complete volume of scripture at home. And now it's on everyone's phone and laptop. But also, and this is where the turban comes in, what appears on the internet has to some extent rewritten and envisaged Sikh tradition, because if you look at pictures of Sikh women in the 18th and 19th century, they will tend to be wearing a turban, which was not historically the case, but it's how they appear increasingly in online material. And so I think a lot of women who are wearing the turban believe that this was the norm much more widely than it probably was. And it is partly the influence of the internet. Now, when I started my research amongst Sikhs in the UK, a lot of Sikh places of worship, they weren't people's houses, but they tended to be in not so much rented premises, but in repurposed buildings, whether they were schools or some other sort of building. And then it might have a few elements of architecture reminiscent of historic gurdwaras in Punjab that we sort of added on, like a dome, for instance. But now we have these wonderful purpose-built, at enormous expense, buildings. And here you can see the gurdwaras, which we have in Leamington, that's Gurdwara Sahib. And then next to that, the more modern looking building is Guru Manio Granth Gurdwara in Slough. And then the more aerial view is of the Gurdwara Sri Guru Singh Sabha in Southall. There's the Gravesend Gurdwara on the bottom left, the Guru Nanak Darbar Sahib. And then the Smethwick Guru Nanak Gurdwara is bottom right. And Sikh schools. Once upon a time, the Labour Party particularly was not enthusiastic about faith schools at all. And then there was a shift, I think, during Tony Blair's time, and other religious groups were encouraged to open schools, whether they were evangelical Christian groups or Muslim or whatever. And so there are now 13 schools, as far as I know, in this country. The Seva School is in Coventry, so not far from where I'm sitting. In the middle, I've got something which represents the Nishkam School Trust, and there is a massive Nishkam Gurdwara in Birmingham, and you can see the values which it espouses for young people. They are to serve humanity selflessly with an abundance of love, compassion, and forgiveness. And then on the right, just a bit of a school which I visited in Romford in Essex recently. So you may want to talk about Sikhs and schools. One of the things I would say is that very often the part of the impetus towards school comes from charismatic individuals and their followings. Certainly in the case of the Nishkam School Trust, that is the case. And these charismatic individuals are often referred to as Babaji or as a sant. And on the one hand, they inspire tremendous commitment to the religious discipline and to being initiated into the Sikh Khalsa community. And on the other hand, critics regard it all as rather suspect because there can be no human guru after the 10, and sometimes they feel that followers of these people are overstepping the mark and treating them as living gurus. I've noticed a great change in the abundance relatively of Sikhs in public art now. Once upon a time, all you could find was, for instance, the inscription that I've got on the top left in Lichfield Cathedral, commemorating the loss of British lives in the Anglo-Sikh Wars in the middle of the 19th century. But that's no longer the case. We've got a statue of Dalip Singh on horseback, as he's imagined in Thetford in Norfolk. In fact, local people remember him very differently from that, as rather a rather less romantic looking figure. But this is how he's represented. In the middle, we've got the Sikh War Memorial, which is on a traffic island, a roundabout in Coventry, actually. Then there has been a war memorial, which is top right, which is in Wednesbury, Wolverhampton. And only, I think, a few weeks ago, certainly this year, this wonderful sculpture of Banda Singh Bahadur, a great Sikh hero, which is now outside the Gurdwara in Gravesend and has been created by a certain 3D technology, which I don't begin to understand, but it's very impressive. And Gurinder Singh Mann in Leicester is very involved in that. And yeah, a few more examples of Sikhs in public art. So on the left-hand side, you can see the base of a sculpture in Cardiff commemorating Betty Campbell, who was the first black headmistress. And you can see amongst the pupils around the base, there is a little Sikh boy, and you can see his top knot. And on the right-hand side, well, you can't probably see it, but I put a bit of the famous statue called the Meeting Place from St Pancras Station, and round the base of that, there are workers, railway workers, and one of them is a turbaned Sikh. In the middle here, I've foregrounded part of the wonderful mural that was created by somebody called Bill Gilding in Stapleton Stapleton Road station in Bristol in 1999. Here you see a Sikh chatting with his friend at the station. And I don't want you to think that, you know, Sikhs are all a matter of India and the UK. There are large populations of Sikhs in America, even larger in Canada. But in Europe, the second biggest Sikh population after the UK's is in Italy. And it's quite nice, I think, to end up with a reminder that when we're eating parmesan and mozzarella, it has almost certainly been created by Sikh dairy workers in North and Central Italy. And, oh, I'm just ending. I don't think you can see my email address, but if anyone wants to contact me, sorry about that. If anyone wants to contact me, they can do so through my University of Warwick email address, which is not hard to find. It's eleanor.nesbitt@warwick.ac.uk. And I've just put a few publications that I've been involved in over the years that relate to Sikhs. And what I have found most wonderful has been opportunities to co-author with a Sikh, which helps to sensitize me as a clumsy outsider to issues and sensitivities. And I've just learnt so much from my co-authors and from my other Sikh friends. So I'm saying thank you. And that's the conclusion to my PowerPoint.
Well, thank you, Eleanor, so much for that really interesting talk this evening. I really enjoyed it. I've learnt so much. I was particularly really interested to hear about the Italian cheese making Sikhs, who I didn't know about at all. I love to hear about the music and the people doing music grades in traditional Sikh instruments, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. And it was really interesting to see about the Sikh martial arts as well, which was another thing that I didn't even know existed. So thank you so much. I think what's been inspiring for me was to hear like your passion for making connection and building relationship and really getting alongside and learning properly, and that kind of like it's just that readiness to learn in a really human and humble way, and then to be able to share it with us, which is really such a treat. So thank you very much, Eleanor.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And if you have any further questions or criticisms or whatever, do get back to me.